always interested in economic forecasting because we've had unfortunately, a mixed record of it in Australia and around the world. So it's good to talk about a new approach.
How do you get the people with the best judgment to make the judgments? Well, we haven't really solved that problem. We just get the most senior people to make those judgments. And the way to get to the forefront is to have a process of integrity where people who are good at forecasting end up with better reputations than people who are not so good at forecasting. What I want is a process that has legitimacy, because I believe that if I looked into what that process was, it would add up, it would have integrity. In the words of Charlie Munger, the highest form of civilization is a seamless web of deserved trust.
Nicholas, good to be catching up with you again on economic forecasting.
Likewise.
So, Nicholas, it's been a few weeks now since your article was published in the Financial Times. So your article, How to Improve Economic Forecasting, and we chatted about that in the previous conversation, in the lead up to that coming out. So your ideas about how the Bank of England and other central banks or treasuries or finance ministries can improve economic forecasting.
Yep.
So it's been a few weeks since that's come out. You've had a bit of feedback. How would you describe the reaction to your article?
I think it's been the best reaction. I've published 3 pieces in the Fin of this, in the Financial Times of this kind, which is a sort of, hey, why don't we do this? It's reasonably out there kind of proposal. And my judgment of the comments, and you've looked at them slightly more carefully than me, that I looked at them, in the first 24, 48 hours, and I thought they were more positive and more constructive than is mostly the case in comment sections. It's a pretty sad state of affairs, and nevertheless the case that even in a really high quality newspaper like the Financial Times, a lot of the people, they're not super ignorant and just kind of just totally dumb, but what they do is they sort of come on and they make a point. And the point is a perfectly okay point. One of the points, for instance, is, well, weather forecasting, which I was full of praise for, is different to economic forecasting because the weather doesn't decide to change its mind when it sees a forecast. And human beings do. It's a very good point. It doesn't completely obliterate all the points I was making. So if someone wants to come on and say that, that's fine. I know that. But they're not really participating in the spirit of things. Another person who wrote a letter to the Financial Times, I think his name's Tim Connington or Conton, you might know his name. He said that really what mattered was having models that have proper allowance for monetary policy in them. Well, I'm not against having models that have a proper allowance for monetary policy in them, but it doesn't really address the point. And then there were some really quite good criticisms. The other thing that was really good was that I was approached by a number of people, and some of them, well, one was a large corporate which is doing Tetlockian forecasting tournaments internally. That was an interesting exercise, and I've been engaged with them. I mean, they haven't been paying me or anything, but I've been suggesting that they look further afield to the services of people like Warren Hatch, who you interviewed on your podcast. He runs a thing called, well, it's called Good Judgment. I don't know whether it's Good Judgment Inc. or anyway, it's not the Philip Tetlock project, which is run with inside universities, but it's an offshoot of it, which is a commercial project. That was interesting. There was another economist who was really quite pissed off, if I might say this, about the fact that forecasting prowess is not a very strong criterion of promotion inside government agencies that deal with economics, including government agencies in which forecasting is a very important matter. And he's right. And I talked to him about Kaggle and how Kaggle, the data science forecasting platform that I was involved in when it started up, has changed the market to a substantial extent because people want data scientists who actually perform well, and you can see whether they perform well or not on Kaggle. And then another person who contacted me was actually from the Bank of England. Now, I've not had that experience in Australia where someone from inside government, you publish something. I mean, it wasn't directly critical of the bank. I suppose you could say it was in a way. Anyway, he engaged me and he said, well, actually, we do a little bit of what you're suggesting. And it's true that the Bank of England, which is about my favourite central bank, I think they've done better than any other central bank in terms of their thinking, not, it turns out, in terms of all their judgments about inflation and so on, because we require a degree of clairvoyance for that, and they've had a recent spate of arguably bad luck in terms of working out the future. But he pointed out that the Bank of England does have a very, very simple, in the form of seeking feedback from the community, it asks people for their own forecast. Well, that's a good beginning, and it's better than any other bank that I know. So I thought it was a terrific reaction.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Citizens panels, I think they call them. So I'll put a link in the show notes. I thought that was really good, and it really is heartening to see how open they are. And you're right. I mean, I can't remember anyone from an Australian government agency getting in touch, or if they did get in touch, it would be, this has to be confidential, and it wouldn't be an official
exactly.
official email. So I think that's a good point about the Bank of England. So that was great to see that. Now, just on some of those points you raised, you mentioned about modelling, and was there one comment that said, the issue was just the specification of the model? And I think the way you reacted to that was right. And so some of the comments I took out of the FT, like there were some really positive comments in the comment section of the Financial Times. There was one about, this sort of approach could have helped us in the early days of COVID. It could have avoided us from having some of the more
ridiculous
forecasts. And I think there was some criticism of the forecasts from a Sage, I think they were. Sage.
That's right, Sage. And there was a guy who got himself briefly famous and then arguably infamous. You put his name in these notes we have in front of us.
Neil Ferguson.
Neil Ferguson, that's it. And you just had to look into that for a while to see that the model was an immensely complex model. It wasn't clear what it was useful for, but it wasn't useful for quickly trying to understand, ask quick what-if questions. It was an ornery monster of a model that produced a different result every time you ran it because it was so complex. Not built to, certainly not in that situation, it was not built to help people make quick probabilistic decisions. But because it was a model, and because he was at a university, Imperial College, as I recall, I hope correctly, then he had the stamp, he had the brand. And so we spent a fair bit of our time with his model. It was pretty low-grade stuff.
Yeah. And so some of the negative comments, or there were some people who were saying, look, you haven't taken into account the fact that we've made all these advances in economic forecasting and there are these new techniques and you're unaware of them. I'm not sure that's true.
Well, I didn't mention any. Mention any. So, I mean, I'm sure I'm unaware of some of them, but he had no evidence that I was, because what he's or she is criticising me for is strictly irrelevant. There is a state of the art of forecasting. The Bank of England or anyone else is either at the forefront or a bit back from the forefront. And the way to get to the forefront is to have a process of integrity where people who are good at forecasting end up with better reputations than people who are not so good at forecasting.
Yeah, exactly. And the point I would make, like when I read those comments, they were almost, I think they were assuming that it's the model that gives the forecast that's published in the Bank of England monetary policy statement or in any of these statements from economic agencies. It's actually a forecast directly from a model, and it almost never is. There's always an element of judgment. The model is one input into the actual official forecast, and if you read the publications of the Bank of England, that's very clear. And so your approach is about taking all of the the evidence out there or different views. I mean, it could be, and I think this is something I was chatting with Warren Hatch about, if I remember correctly. Warren was saying that, look, there can be value from having people in teams. Like someone has a model, then there's others who are more qualitative, and there are others who are looking at different bits of data. You want a variety of approaches, I think, and perspectives to get better forecasts.
I'd say I think that's absolutely right, but I think you can say something more than that. What you can, we exist in a society in which governments and agents and organisations are performing for our entertainment, if I can put it that way. At least under the gaze of the media, they're doing stuff, they're justifying them stuff, they've got comms people coming out saying this is what we're doing, and they're putting over a plausible story. And then you get pundits, I would say like us, except I try not to do this, but almost all pundits and almost all Twitter pundits, almost all instant experts, they come out and they say what you should do is X or Y. But in fact, what you should do is a very complex and acculturated performance. So it will involve technical understanding of modelling. It will then involve judgments, as you say. But then how do you get the people with the best judgment to make the judgments? Well, we haven't really solved that problem. We just get the most senior people to make those judgments. So it's like me saying, I want a good COVID vaccine, and this is the process that we should go through to get the COVID vaccine. What I want is a process that has legitimacy, because I believe that if I looked into what that process was, it would add up, it would have integrity. In the words of Charlie Munger, the highest form of civilization is a seamless web of deserved trust. In other words, there isn't a clear line between the pundit class and what you do. If you're doing anything difficult, building a bridge or, dare I say it, a nuclear submarine, pundits can't actually say very much. They can say a few things about what would be really dumb, but there's so much that goes into this. And the public discussion isn't had in that kind of way. But that ultimately is one of the reasons that I'm such a fan of Philip Tetlock's stuff on forecasting and creating forecasting tournaments, because it's one of the few areas where you can start to build some objective relation between reality and us poor munchkins working away trying to work out what that reality is. And our social and political institutions have done, well, the job they've done might be the best in history, but when you look at it, it's not all that great. There are plenty of things wrong with it. So this is a rare case where there is a better way. You can see what it is, you can understand its principles, and we should really try to implement it and also learn from it how we could extend that sense-making, reality-contacting function.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree there. So, I mean, one other point I just wanted to make is on that, the forecasting, the whatever the best practice or in terms of technical forecasting.
Yeah.
One of the articles it was linked to in the comment section of the Financial Times was an article that was by a number of forecasting experts, and one of them was Jennifer Castles, who works with David Hendry, and Hendry's been on the show, and that. And if you're listening, I think that and if you're interested in these issues, that would be a good conversation to go back to, because David talks a lot about the ways that he tries to get his model-based forecast as best as possible. Now, that can be an input into a super forecasting approach. It's not these things aren't mutually exclusive, but
yes,
what he's
exactly.
doing, he's trying to build an econometric model.
That's right.
And that can be an input into the forecasting. But the point I'd like to emphasise is that the forecasts that end up in the reports and that end up influencing budgets, they're never just the outcome of models, because we know that a model is useful, but there's always a judgment involved. You're always going to be tweaking things to make it because there'll be things in the model you go, hang on, that may not be realistic in the current circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Righto. So, Nicholas, I just want to have that quick catch up, because I thought, that was a great article of yours, and it's got some excellent feedback, and I mean, I think it's probably achieved what you wanted it to
Yes,
achieve, I
absolutely.
imagine.
Even though
Yeah.
they told me I only had 650 words and then they only allowed me 570 words. So my nice paragraphs about what a big fan I was of Andy Haldane, who is no longer at the Bank of England, they were all taken out. But there you are. I like to
You were a fanboy.
Andy Haldane, while he was a civil servant, was my favourite civil servant in all the world.
Very good. Yes, very good. I'll put some links in about Andy Haldane. Did you have you written this on your Club Trubbo at all, Nicholas?
I'm not sure I have. Maybe I should. But no, I have, because I published some articles in the Mandarin, which is an Australian public policy magazine, if you like, and they're always backed up onto my blog. And one compared the Australian Reserve Bank with the Bank of England, and particularly the blog Notes Underground, I think it's called. Always good to quote Dostoevsky. I suppose when Greg Clark isn't quoting titles from Hemingway, the Bank of England can be paraphrasing Dostoevsky in the name of its blog, Notes Underground, I think it's called, and it has lots of really interesting think pieces. It's not very standard academic stuff, although there's some of that as well. I think it's a very sad thing that government, certainly independent government agencies around the world, don't do that a great deal more. I maybe fondly imagined that Andy was one of the movers and shakers behind that, but certainly he led a lot of research showing the costs of too big to fail implicit subsidies for large banks, and just did lots of used the independence of the central bank in a way that was very, very helpful in difficult times during the global financial crisis and in the years after the financial crisis, as people tried to work out what had gone wrong and how to fix things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I agree about the Bank of England probably being the best central bank. Certainly has the best museum, and I guess there's that literary connection.
Yes.
And I only learned about this when I went to their museum. Kenneth Graham worked there, the author of Wind in the Willows.
Huh.
Yeah, he worked there. I forget. He had a relatively senior position there in the Bank of England, because they've got a little display about Kenneth Graham in their...
I missed it. I'm sorry that I missed it, because I have seen that museum. It's quite small. It's just a few artefacts, as I recall, a room or two, or am I wrong there?
It's maybe a few rooms, but there's that great display where you can lift up a bar of gold. You stick your hand in a glove in this glass box, and you can lift up an actual gold bar, which I thought was pretty cool. They've got all the currency. So he got up to the rank of secretary in 1908. So I don't think he wasn't the governor, but he got up to a senior position. Yeah.
Excellent.
Very good.
All right.
Okay. Nicholas, thanks again. That was it was good to catch up, because, good to always interested in economic forecasting, because we've had unfortunately, a mixed record of it in Australia and around the world. So it's good to talk about a new approach, and well done for doing your best to advance one.
Thanks very much, Jen.